Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Friday he believes Iran wants to make a deal. Trump, of course, threatened military action against the Islamic Republic earlier in the week if they do not reach a new nuclear agreement with the U.S. And, at the time of recording, at least 6 U.S. Navy destroyer ships, as well as an aircraft carrier, are in the region. Now, Trump's comments came as Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted senior Iranian security official Ali Larijani in Moscow for talks. The same day, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, said in Turkey that Iran is willing to resume nuclear talks, but only if Washington ceases its threats. The two visits are part of a flurry of diplomatic activity in the Middle East. Earlier this week, Iranian state media reported that Araghchi and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff were exchanging informal messages. But formal nuclear talks have been suspended since the 12-day war between Israel and Iran last June. The U.S., of course, carried out strikes of its own against Iranian nuclear facilities during that conflict before negotiating a ceasefire. The possibility of another conflict has left the region on edge. Saudi Arabia and the UAE both said this week they would not allow their airspaces to be used to attack Iran. In other signs of pressure on Tehran, the European Union designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization on Thursday. On Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told the Senate that the Iranian economy is in collapse and said protests could resume. And speculation is growing in Washington about a potential intervention against the Iranian government, a la the one against Venezuela earlier this month. So where does that leave us? My guests this episode are Al Monitor's correspondents in Washington, Elizabeth Hagedorn, who covers the State Department, and Jared Szuba, who covers the Pentagon. They offer insights into the status of U.S.-Iranian diplomacy, the military options that are on the table, the potential ripple effects of an American strike, and more. Hope you enjoy. Jared and Elizabeth, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. So for those listening, it feels like we've been on call for this story, potential U.S. military action against Iran for weeks now. Elizabeth, I want to start with you. What is the status of U.S. diplomacy? Are the two sides talking at present? And what kind of deal is on the table?
So, Adam, there is communication ongoing, certainly through various intermediaries like Oman. And I would also expect there to be some direct text exchanges over the past month between Trump envoy Steve Witkoff and Iran's foreign minister, both of whom led last year's nuclear talks. And then Trump on Thursday said he himself planned to talk with Iran. He didn't elaborate on what he meant by that, except to say that he believes the Iranians want a nuclear deal. The issue is there is very little overlap between Washington and Tehran's positions. The U.S. is demanding zero uranium enrichment, and Iran insists it has a right to enrich, as they say, for peaceful purposes. But of course, they've amassed enough fissile material for multiple bombs. So, having taken out much of Iran's nuclear program with airstrikes this summer, the Trump admin is now seeking a deal that would not only address Iran's nuclear activity, but also its ballistic missile program and regional proxies. The problem here is the Iranians have no desire to make concessions on either of those issues. So, where does that leave us? I think, absent a change of heart in Tehran, we're likely to remain in this standoff for a while as the world waits to see if Trump makes good on his threats of military action, which I'm sure Jared will outline. So, it just feels very reminiscent of where we were in June, just before Trump authorized strikes.
And just as a quick follow-up, you spoke to an Iranian official recently about this. Do you get the sense there is any wiggle room at all, or that anything could change if they could get maybe a concession on one thing, they might soften on another demand? What's your sense?
The only flexibility I'm hearing from the Iranians is that they have apparently indicated to intermediaries that they would be open to some sort of commitment to formally suspend their uranium enrichment. Of course, the strikes this summer effectively halted that enrichment. So I don't imagine that being a very compelling offer for the Trump administration, which is seeking zero uranium enrichment from Iran.
And Jared, moving on to you, what is the status of U.S. military assets in the region? And basically, what I mean is, given the state of that Is a strike conceivable or feasible at present?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely feasible. It's conceivable. The president has alluded to it, though he hasn't offered any specifics about how that would go down. I think it's safe to say that the firepower within range of Iran, U.S. firepower, is fairly overwhelming right now. You've got the USS Abraham Lincoln with embarked FA-18 and F-35 squadrons. You've got electronic warfare capabilities. You have at least a dozen, possibly close to 2 dozen U.S. Air Force refueling tankers based in the region. You've got F-15s based in Jordan that were recently deployed to Jordan. So this is an enormous amount of strike potential, not counting the Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles that'll be carried by several destroyers, or at least 6 U.S. Navy destroyers in the region, 2 of them in the Eastern Med, one of them the USS Delbert Black, just reached port in Eilat on the Red Sea in Israel today, likely pre-positioned for defensive capabilities. So a lot of that capability is defensive, but a lot of it is also offensive. So it's absolutely feasible there could be strikes really at any time if and when the president decides to do that.
And Jared, what are you hearing in terms of what military options are on the table? I mean, one thing I find interesting is, do you think they're going for perhaps a Venezuela style operation, or is the goal something else?
Well, I think it's very unlikely that the U.S. would attempt to sort of kidnap or abduct the supreme leader of Iran or President Pezeshkian, as was done in Venezuela by forces under U.S. Joint Special Operations Command. For one thing, I mean, the geographic distances of Iran are significantly larger. Trump has repeatedly now publicly criticized the 1980 operation authorized by former President Carter, which failed. It was actually Delta Force's first known operation, which failed to rescue, I think it was 53 hostages during the hostage crisis in 1980. So I think the insertion of ground forces to abduct an Iranian leader is a lot less likely in a country like Iran for a number of reasons. One of them being U.S. intelligence penetration, and another being the regime resilience that's been widely discussed and we've reported on previously at Al Monitor. So the challenge, it seems, for the White House is how to coerce strategic concessions from Iran, from the Islamic Republic's leadership, via threats of military force. The U.S. has never successfully done that before, but Trump administration officials are betting that this time is going to be different, with Iran's economy in a tailspin and the destruction or large-scale defeat of Iran's Western defensive bulwark in Hezbollah. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But the military retains a number of options, many of them lethal, some of them non-lethal. The question is, can and how, if so, will the U.S. military be able to contribute to the sort of coercion of Iran's leadership's decision making?
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Okay, we're back. Elizabeth, going back to you, you did some interesting reporting on the Americans currently detained in Iran. What does this escalation mean for them? Is that at all being considered by the administration or the Iranians for that matter?
It's a good question, Adam. For all of Trump's threats to Iran over its nuclear program and its crackdown on protesters, Trump has yet to mention the fact that the Iranians are holding a number of American citizens in prison on dubious, politically motivated charges. Our listeners may remember that during the Biden administration, there were also a handful of Americans held in Iran who, after years of negotiations in September 2023, the Biden administration was able to get out in a prisoner exchange. But in that time since, Iran has picked up a number of other dual citizens and is either holding them in prison or under house arrest. I'm told that the State Department's Office for Hostage Affairs is formally tracking the cases of 6, though there could be as many as 8 and likely more, because oftentimes the families don't want to go public for fear of retaliation by the regime. The concern I'm hearing from former U.S. officials and representatives of the hostages is their risk profile goes way up in the event of strikes. And, not only could Iran retaliate in some way against the Americans who are already detained, but we could see retaliatory arrests of more Americans or Westerners. One of the lawyers was saying this is the time to get Americans out. The U.S. has real leverage here as it threatens to strike Iran. And also, what better goodwill gesture from Tehran to show its desire for negotiations is credible than to release these Americans?
And Jared, we'll end with you. What is the Pentagon's assessment of the damage that could be accomplished with strikes on Iran? And also, if you could please tell us a bit more about the specific military options being floated.
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. So, obviously, we mentioned that the U.S. military, the forces that are arrayed in the region, assembled in the region, have all sorts of capabilities, running from launching TLAM, Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, more than 1,000 miles into small targets, perhaps the size of an office window. But the question is, what are strikes like that going to accomplish? I think ideally, what policymakers are going to want is, 2 things. One, U.S. strikes would have to coerce or further the White House's achievement of demands that Iran give up its nuclear enrichment program and potentially, its ballistic missile and other conventional and unconventional. And 2, the strikes would ideally have to help preempt Iranian retaliation. Now, it's possible the Trump administration could order new strikes, as it did in June 2025, against Iran's nuclear facilities. The president has left that option open. He has publicly threatened Iran that could happen again. The New York Times today reported that among the options the president and his advisors have considered is potentially inserting U.S. special operators to further destroy on the ground remaining nuclear infrastructure. Now, I understand from my sources that was a part of CENTCOM's original plans in recent years for what became Operation Midnight Hammer, this long-range B-2 naval bombing of Iran's 3 key nuclear facilities at Esfahan, Fordow, and Natanz. The president didn't authorize the special forces component during the June strikes. It's not quite clear why, but it's worth keeping an eye on that option. There have been reports in the open source flight tracker websites that CSAR aircraft, Hercules 130J, at least one has arrived in Jordan. That's combat search and rescue aircraft. So that at least suggests that U.S. Central Command is preparing for the possibility of maybe potentially in an emergency having to rescue U.S. personnel behind enemy lines. That being said, senior Pentagon officials have long been concerned that they cannot simply destroy Iran's nuclear program and end it forever. The scientific knowledge is too institutionalized and is too diffuse among Iranian officials. As one official put it, former senior U.S. military official put it to me recently, they'll never have to start from scratch again, end quote. Now that, regardless of whether or not the U.S. continues to strike these facilities. And a lot of former senior U.S. national security officials point to an alleged Israeli covert campaign to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists in the past 2 decades and say that that may have slowed the program, but it certainly hasn't halted it. So whether or not the Trump administration is going to restrike these facilities or target other Iranian nuclear infrastructure, it's not going to solve the problem. That is the assessment of a number of senior officials within the Pentagon, current and former. So the real question is, how do you convince, if you're the Trump administration, how do you convince the senior leadership of the Islamic Republic to change its policy, whether that's done through coercion, threat of violence, or possibly piecemeal strikes on Basij and IRGC facilities, possibly against its ballistic missile program and infrastructure, while continuing to turn other levers of power, such as economic. And of course, we've seen now the Europeans on board with sanctions. So we'll see how that plays out. But not easy, not likely to be an easy, quick, one and done fix like we saw in Venezuela.
Elizabeth and Jared, thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to more of your insightful reporting from Washington.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.